There, continuing to have technical difficulties. So if you were on this stream and we just dropped you, it wasn't anything personal. We just lost stuff. Okay, my calming picture, that's in our backyard. Courtesy of my wonderful gardener wife. Yes, yes, yes. This one over here? I think it's nice because there's light coming through from the fence. It's like death and resurrection's happening right there.
We knew there was
That's a good redirect.
And then there's a little bit of balance in the picture because that green thing on the far left there or far right, that's a weed. So so you've got. Yeah.
There's better pictures on Facebook.
Yes. Well, that's our backyard right now. After a whole winter of snow, that's a wonderful thing. So that's good. Okay, so go from pictures of beauty to pictures of craziness, and here's the picture of craziness. We're going to talk shipwrecks today. We're in the most dramatic section of Acts. Drama, I mean in terms of drama. I mean high sea drama. It's crazy stuff. So it's not quite this crazy, but it's crazy. So we're going to take 2 weeks to get Paul from Caesarea over to Rome because that's where he's headed at the end of the book of Acts. And it's going to take 2 weeks because the author Luke devotes a ton of text talking about how hard it was to get from Caesarea to Rome. And there's shipwrecks. I mean, it's everything. There's no pirates in the story. That I think would have made it better. There's no pirates in the story, but there are shipwrecks. So that's what we're going to look at today. So let's just dive in and see where it takes us. This is what happens when you explore the Bible and let's just see where it goes. So here's where it goes. So we're in chapter 27, very near the end of Acts, verse 1. And when it was decided that we should sail for Italy, they delivered Paul and some other prisoners to a centurion of the Augustan cohort named Julian. By the way, Augustan cohort is Caesar's cohort. That's a big, big deal. So this is a big toot. Big toot, okay? And embarking on a ship of Adramyttium, which was about to sail to the ports along the coast of Asia. That's the left side of Turkey, Ephesus, and stuff like that. We put to sea, accompanied by Aristarchus, a Macedonian from Thessalonica. So Luke has given us a ton of information right here. We're just getting on the road, and we're going to head towards Rome, and the first stop is probably going to be the Turkish coast, the western Turkish coast. So they found a boat. They went down the port in Caesarea, which is a famous port. They asked all the captains on the port, where are you going? Well, we're going to Ephesus. And they said, okay, we're with you, and we'll find another boat when we get there. So very, very much like that Star Wars thing, where they went to find a ship that was going to a certain place. That's what they do here. So anyway, and by the way, Aristarchus, we've seen that name before. In fact, he shows up already, the riot in Ephesus. Remember that? Speaking of the left edge of Turkey. He was there when that riot happened. He was with Paul then. He was in Macedonia, which is where he's from, after the riot in Acts 20, when they started to move toward home. And then we find at the end of Colossians and Philemon, he's in prison with Paul. So he sticks with the guy a long time. And Aristarchus has a lot of clues to his stature based on his name. So arist, aristocratic, that's a privileged class. So the arist part is this is a privileged guy. And archus means top or number one, right? Like arch enemy, number one enemy. So Aristarchus means an elite, privileged number one. That's what. So this is an uber dude. So this guy is well respected, and he comes from Macedonia. Okay, so here's the overview. We're going to get ourselves to Rome in a couple weeks here. So we're starting right there on the right in Caesarea, and we're going to work our way through some of these ports as we, by the way, get ourselves to Rome. The boat that was supposed to go to the left side of Turkey, it doesn't get there. So we'll see what happens when the entire thing. So here we go. He's going to go from Caesarea, and if he could take an airplane, he'd go to Rome, and it'd be a very short, maybe 4-hour trip. This is not going to be a 4-hour trip. The ship set sail on the shore of this uncharted desert isle. Okay, verse 3. The next day, we put in at Sidon. Well, Sidon is very close by. And Julius treated Paul kindly and gave him leave to go to his friends and be cared for. So they go to Sidon. Paul says, I know people in Sidon. Can we just get out, stretch our legs, talk to our friends? Maybe they'll give us dinner. Sure. So it's not quite as tight, a kind of, what do you want to call it? enforcement from the Roman yacht. I'm losing my words here. So anyway, so they go up to Sidon. If you look over there, it's just a hop and a skip up. Sidon is in present-day Lebanon. It's right past the Israeli border to the north. So they go up to Sidon, first stop, and then we move on. And then putting out to sea from there. We sailed under the lee of Cyprus because the winds were against us. And when we had sailed across the open sea along the coast of Cilicia and Pamphylia, we came to Myra in Lycia. Lost? I am too. Pictures. Ready? Here we go. We got a map. So we're over here in Sidon. They go up around Cyprus, and they head up, and they find themselves in Myra. So they go past close to Cilicia, which is this bottom part of Turkey on the right here before it meets the coast, and then Pamphylia, which is the coastal part next to that, and then they make their way to Myra. So that's as far as they've gotten. Not bad progress. No storms so far. Okay. Verse 6. There, the centurion found a ship of Alexandria sailing for Italy. So instead of going all the way to Ephesus, they said, we found another boat. Let's switch boats. This guy's going to Italy, sailing for Italy, and he put us on board. And we sailed slowly for a number of days and arrived with difficulty to Cnidus. And as the wind did not allow us to go farther, we sailed under the lee of Crete off Salmone. Coasting along it with difficulty, we came to a place called Fair Havens, near which was the city of Lycia. Whew. More maps. You ready? Okay, here we go. So they're in Myra. They go up around next to Cnidus, and then they come down to Fair Havens, which is a southern port on the bottom side of Crete. So they're making good progress. They're going the right direction. And by the way, Fair Havens today looks like this. That's a satellite picture. That's the port of Fair Havens, this whole round thing right here, which is why it's a Fair Haven. In fact, it's even called Fair Haven to this day. It's a nice place. And I took this picture on the satellite high enough that if you can actually look across the entire island of Crete, and that's the rest of the Mediterranean on that side, toward the Aegean side. So there you go, Fair Havens. It's a nice place. I zoomed in on Fair Havens here on the satellite maps. I might want to go there someday because I saw lounge chairs and umbrellas on the beach. Yeah, okay, that sounds fair to me. Fair Havens. Okay, so they're in Fair Havens. Sounds like everything's just peachy. Verse 9. And since much time had passed, which I think is because they found the umbrellas and the lawn chairs too. Since much time had passed and the voyage was now dangerous because even the fast was already over, we're late in the calendar year, Paul advised them saying, sirs, I perceive that the voyage will be with injury and much loss, not only of the cargo and the ship, but also of our lives. He's saying if we sail on from here, we're all going to die. And all the monetary value of the cargo is going to be gone, and the ship's going to be sunk. I think we're late enough in the season. Let's just kind of hole up right here. But the centurion paid more attention to the pilot and to the owner of the ship than to what Paul said. Well, that's actually rational, because what does Paul know about sailing? I mean, he's an intellectual. And he's a Jewish scholar. I would say, so what happens is the Roman centurion, who also is not a sailor, by the way, he says, well, I'll just defer upon the guy who's paid to run the ship and the guy who owns this ship, who's going to suffer loss. I'll listen to what they say. So, okay, that sounds reasonable. Well, and because the harbor was not suitable to spend the winter in, the majority decided to put out to sea from there on the chance that somehow they could reach Phoenix. It's a harbor of Crete, facing both southwest and northwest, and spend the winter there. So you want to find a port that actually is aimed the right direction because of the prevailing dangerous winds in the wintertime. So they said, let's not go far. Let's stay on Crete. Fair Havens is nice in the summertime, but by the time the fall and the winter comes, they're going to fold up the umbrellas and take in the lawn chairs, and it's going to get nasty here. Let's just go up the coast a little bit in Crete to a better harbor. That would be Phoenix, okay? Because it's pointed the right direction. It actually aims in a couple directions. So here's a close-up of Crete. Fair Havens is down here on the bottom. So the idea is to go from Fair Havens now before winter sets in and go up to Phoenix. It's just a short jaunt. A little 3-hour tour. A 3-hour tour. Just go up to Phoenix. So that's actually it's a pretty good bet. By the way, in a second, Cowder down here will become important to us. Okay. Well, what happens? You can feel the impending doom. Well, 13. Now, when the south wind blew gently, we need a south wind. There it is. South wind blowing gently. That's the right direction to go up to Phoenix. Right? Yes. Okay, so when the south wind blew gently, supposing that they'd obtained their purpose, they weighed anchor, sailed along Crete, close to the shore. Say, perfect. But soon, dun dun dun, a tempestuous wind called the northeaster. By the way, it's where the wind comes from when they give you points, right? So it's coming from the northeast, which means it's coming across the land, struck down from the land. So suddenly the wind shifted, and the wind is like this. Will they make it to Phoenix? No. It looked like a pretty good bet, Well, when the ship was caught and could not face the wind, we gave way to it. We just let go, and we are driven along, running under the lee of a small island called Cauda, and we managed with difficulty to secure the ship's boat. So instead of continuing up to Phoenix, they got pushed down, and they barely got hold of themselves close to Cauda. This is bad. They're getting driven away, and they're on the brink of winter coming. This is a very bad deal. They're exposed. Well, sure enough, after hoisting it up, they used supports to undergird the ship. It was shallow enough they could undergird the ship. And then, fearing that they would run aground on the Syrtis, that's the rocks there, they lowered the gear, and thus they were driven along. So they knew they were going to get kind of pounded on the rocks. One way to not get pounded on the rocks is to float higher in the water. So they chucked all their stuff. But when they chucked all their stuff, that also made them free floating, and now they're adrift. So it's actually it's a gamble. Do you free float higher so you won't hit the rocks? But that might cause you to just drift off into Never Never Land. So what's worse, the impending doom of breaking on the rocks or being adrift in the Mediterranean with winter coming? 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. So they're adrift is what happens right here. Well, since we were violently storm-tossed, they began the next day to jettison the cargo, even more cargo because of this. And on the third day, by the way, you jettison cargo in a storm because it takes the gunwales, the gunwales, if you read English, it takes the gunwales and actually makes them ride higher in the water, so the splashing water have to go higher to get into the boat, right? Okay, that's all I know about boats, by the way. Okay, so they were jettisoning even more cargo. On the third day, they threw the ship's tackle overboard with their own hands. So they took everything that was loose and chucked it, even the stuff they need to run the boat. 20. And when neither sun nor stars appeared for many days, and no small tempest lay on us, all hope of our being saved was at last abandoned. We're dead. It was a pretty bad storm. Well, since they had been without food for a long time, Paul stood up among them and said, "Men, you should have listened to me." Hey, I told you this would happen. I might be just some kind of Jewish, intellectual, but I told you this would happen. Well, no, that's not how he means this. Man, you should have listened to me and not have set sail from Crete and incurred this injury and loss. Yet now, look, I urge you to take heart, for there will be no loss of life among you, but only of this ship itself. The ship will be lost, but no lives will be lost. And at that point, I'm sure the owner of the ship and the centurion and the guy who's the pilot of the ship is saying, yeah, what do you know? Well, I'll explain it, he says. This is what I know. For this very night there stood before me an angel of the God to whom I belong and whom I worship. And he said, don't be afraid, Paul. Yes, you must stand before Caesar. So God's plan for you is that you've got to stand before Caesar in Rome. So clearly you're going to survive this. Well, what about everybody else? Well, the angel also said, and behold, God has granted you all those who sail with you. So everyone will keep their lives on board. Oh, okay. So this is what the angel said. And then Paul wants to reassure them, you guys just need to eat because we're all going to survive. Don't stop eating because you think you're going to be dead tomorrow. We need to all eat. We're all going to survive. So take heart, men, for I have faith in God that it will be exactly as I've been told. Ooh. Literally a light in the storm. It'll be exactly as I've been told. But we must run aground on some island. So there's good news and there's bad news. The good news is no one's going to die. The bad news is we're going to run aground and the ship will be lost. Well, actually, all the cargo's already been lost. But the idea of actually running aground someplace and nobody dying is a miracle all by itself, especially in the midst of a storm like this where everyone had given up hope. So we're going to run aground. Now, I put kind of a severe picture right there. Yeah. By the way, when you're envisioning this entire shipwreck that's happening right now, what size of a boat are you envisioning in your mind? And I'll just let you think on that for a while. We'll find out how big it is next week. But it's bigger than you think. Not as big as the Titanic, not as small as an aluminum boat that you put on the pond. So it's somewhere in between those two. Yeah, okay. I just contend it's closer to this in size. This is a major vessel, is what this is. Okay, we'll actually get some proof of that later on. But it hasn't happened yet, okay? We haven't crashed yet. Paul's just saying you guys need to eat because no one's going to die, but we are going to lose the ship. That's still to come. That's God's promise to me, so we can kind of rest in that. So we're not going to look at the shipwreck today. We're going to wait for the dramatic conclusion next week. You already know what's going to happen. God did a plot spoiler for you already. It's going to crash someplace, and no one's going to die. But because this is such a nice place to break in terms of this trip, what I really wanted to talk about as we kind of close this, because this will be a little short today, because I was on my back all this week sick. So this is all you get. Yeah, okay. So anyway, I want to talk about the shipwrecks in your life. Oh, really? Yeah. And we had a lot of shipwrecks that were in front of our eyes as we prayed this morning. There will be shipwrecks in our life. There have been shipwrecks in our life. There will be shipwrecks in our life. You may be in a shipwreck right now. So I wanted to just put this in perspective about shipwrecks that are coming. Because with Paul, why couldn't God just give Paul a happy, safe trip from the Israeli coast to Rome? I mean, wouldn't that be what God is capable of doing? Well, he is capable of it, but why put a shipwreck in the middle of it? Why does God allow shipwrecks in our lives? Yes. So let's look at some passages, and we're going to sort of cap off our thinking about shipwrecks, because I happen to know personally a lot of us are in the middle of shipwrecks right now. One of the prime questions you ask yourself is, God, why did you allow this? And to be clear, there's nothing biblically that tells us that on this side of heaven there will not be continual shipwrecks. However, on that side of heaven, it's different, because that's where he says there will be no more tears, right? So that's a different kind of thing. But from here until then, there will be shipwrecks, and God has a purpose in the shipwreck. So let me just do a survey of some shipwreck topics. So if you're in a shipwreck right now, hopefully this will encourage you. So number one, God never promised us smooth sailing. Well, I gave my heart to Jesus, and he said that from this point out forever, I'll be peaceful and joyful. Well, it's not smooth sailing. There is the offer of peace and joy in the midst of turmoil and storms. But the circumstance of turmoil and storms does not mean that you can't find joy and peace, because that comes from something that's disconnected from your circumstances, right? Your circumstances tempt you to think that God has suddenly abandoned you, but that's not the case. So God never promised us smooth sailing. John 16:33, Jesus himself said, I've said these things to you that in me you may have peace. In the world, you will have tribulation. But take heart, I have overcome the world. So here's the weird thing. You can be in the middle of a shipwreck and find peace. And in fact, you could say that as Paul stood on the deck of that ship and reassured them and said, look, here's the good news, no one's dying. Here's the bad news, the ship will be lost. Paul was probably the only person on board that had any sense of peace. And what was the defining factor that allowed him to have peace in the midst of a very bad situation? Well, he'd heard from God, and he had assurances from God, and he had a relationship with God, and he trusted this God at his word who said no one would die. But there's going to still be calamity, and you're going to have to all experience firsthand a shipwreck. You're going to tell your grandchildren about this one. But it's still traumatic. And I highlighted in yellow the in me, because there's two ins in here. You have a choice to either be in me or in the world. Now, when he says in the world, I don't just mean you live here. Because when he says in me, he doesn't just mean that you're living next to me. He says, these things will happen to you that in me you will have peace. That is, if you actively, spiritually reside in God himself. That's where you find your refuge and your harbor and your source for life and all the resources for life. If you are in him, or what Jesus says, abide in me, if that's where you live, then even though you're in a boat that's sinking, you'll find peace because you're still in him. But you do have a choice. When calamity comes, are you in him? Do you take refuge in him? Or do you continue to take refuge in the world? See, in the world you'll have tribulation. He does mean you actually live in this world. But if you put your faith and trust in the world, like you put your faith and trust in Jesus as an alternative, if you put your faith and trust in the world, it's just going to be heartbreak and lack of peace and everything goes bad. So that's really the contrast he's making right there. You can physically be in the world, but don't really be in the world, because Jesus says they are in the world, but they're not of the world. So that's the mindset Jesus is trying to say right here. And that's the mindset we use when calamity comes upon us. And we say, God, I don't know why you're allowing me to go through this, but I'm going to choose, like Jesus says, to be in you. I'm going to take my refuge in you and find my place of life in you and not in this world. When you put your refuge in the world, you look for worldly solutions to the calamities. When you find your refuge in him, you turn to him for solutions to the calamities. It's a massive difference. And I could tell you lots of stories like this where, for instance, especially missionaries who put themselves in calamitous situations, they say, well, God's got me here. I'm in him, and, this will be okay. This will be okay. Also, shipwrecks are not accidents to God. They're just accidents to you. You didn't expect this happening. I'm sure Paul thought, I'm going to get on a boat. It'll be smooth sailing. It's early fall. It's beautiful weather on the Mediterranean. We're just going to sail across. We're going to have our little drinks with the umbrellas and our glasses on the deck of the ship. We're going to go over to Rome, and everything's going to be just fine. And we're going to walk into Rome before all the bad weather hits, and it'll just be fine. No. Shipwrecks ahead. Shipwrecks are not accidents to God. What they are is they're interruptions to your presumption about what God's going to do for you. Yeah. It's your poor expectations that cause your emotional reactions to shipwrecks. I think what we have to get used to is the fact that in this life, we are going to experience shipwrecks on a pretty regular basis. And, if you have any life history and you look back in your life history, you say, yeah. And even though throughout all of those shipwrecks, you find there actually is God-ordained gold in those shipwrecks. I mean, you can see it from what God has done with those calamities in your life to change things in you and to draw you nearer to God. You can see it. Still, while you're looking at particular shipwrecks, you say to yourself, well, that was valuable on this side of the shipwreck for me. I benefited in great ways that I never thought God would do. However, God, I don't ever want to do one of those again. Icebergs! There's shipwrecks coming all the time. All the time. So you just don't set your expectations wrong. This is a fallen world, and a fallen world will continue to bring icebergs and shipwrecks your way. That's just the way it is. And God does not allow them to happen without his consent or his control. So, God uses them in ways that even to this day, none of us can completely unwind. He uses these kinds of shipwrecks to produce something of extraordinary value in a spiritual sense. And like I say, when I look back at those shipwrecks, I think, man, while they're happening, I had no sense that there was any good in this. What good can come from this? You say to yourself. And yet on this side of you go, yeah, but, that was probably the time in my life where I was closest with God. So there's the other kind of good news, bad news. You want to be close to God? Get ready for shipwrecks. Because what shipwrecks do is they remove out from under you the things of the world that bring buoyancy to your life. And when those things are gone, then you have to start assessing what brings buoyancy, what lifts me up above the troubles of the world like a boat does. Is that God? I'll find refuge in him, and I'll actually start to discover the depths of which he is a refuge to me. It's an image that's so familiar in the Old Testament, especially in the Psalms, where God is a refuge to us. He's a refuge in the storm. So if you're in a boat on an open ocean and there's a gigantic storm and the waves are 30 feet high and you've got a 6-foot boat, there's just no way you're not going to die out there. So that all you can think of is, I got to get to a port. I got to get to still water. I got to find a refuge from this storm. I got to get out of the open ocean. And then you find a refuge. And so David and the other psalmists write all the time, in the midst of a storm like that where I have no control over the power and the elements, God himself is my refuge. He's my port in the storm. And also another great metaphor is he's my rock, the rock that's higher than me, which is another great metaphor in storm kind of speaking, because you look on the shore and say, man, I'm out here bobbing in the water. You know, if you're slightly prone to motion sickness, it's time to take your Dramamine, because we're going to talk about bobbing in the water. And you're bobbing in the water and you're dying and you're sucking down seawater and the water's coming into your boat and you're bailing as fast as possible. This is all metaphorically speaking. You look up on the coastline that is so close and you say, I would sure love to be up on that rock right now. Have you ever been on a rocky coast, been up on a rock when a storm surge is happening out on the water? This happens a lot on the northwestern coast of the United States. You know, Washington and Oregon, big rocky coast, and you're up there and you got your feet planted on a rock and this rain is blowing and the waves are and there's surf and all that kind of stuff. And you're thinking, you know, this is a good place to be. Right on this rock. It cannot be moved by what's happening out there. That's the other metaphor that's used. He's our rock. He can't be moved by what's happening right here. Yes. And that applies to a lot of things. Not only the fact that God is that refuge for us in the storm, but in the midst of all this calamity, God's love for us has not moved. It itself is a rock that doesn't get changed. Can anything separate us from the love of Christ? God in Christ Jesus? No. Anything? No. That's the rock part. That's the rock part. Shipwrecks are not accidents to God. Psalm 37:23. The steps of a man are established by the Lord, and when he delights in his way. And though he fall, he shall not be cast headlong, for the Lord upholds his hand. Dorothy and I used to sing a song based on this verse. So when it says the steps of a man are established, that means, okay, get ready for a mind blower. That means that before the creation of the universe, he saw you and me. He saw our path in life. He saw us being called to him and responding to his call. And then our steps, which means your everyday progress from here to there and into God's bosom, those steps were established. No accidents. Established. No accidents. But he uses the fall word. I wish he just stopped, at the end of verse 23. Because in 24, he admits the fact that even though your steps are established, that is, they're not a surprise to God, still in the process of those steps, you're going to fall. How hard am I going to fall? Well, not that hard. A little child that's learning to walk, and you got their hand, and you're walking along, and they're kind of doing it, And as a parent, you're tempted, I think I'll just let go for a second and see if they can take a couple steps without me, And you're just starting to let go, but you don't let go. And all of a sudden, boom, they're kind of free-falling because they didn't do it right. So you just hold the hand, and they recover. That's exactly the picture he's using right here. Exactly the picture. For the Lord upholds his hand. The Lord is the one who holds his hand. So although the steps of a man are established by the Lord, there's no uncertainty here. There's no accidents to all this stuff. Still, God also foresees your falls. However, when you are in him, he's holding your hand, and you're not going to utterly faceplant. But those kind of falls are useful. Just for, like your child. Is a child who stumbles when you're holding their hand, is that useful to them to understand how to independently walk? Well, yes. Yes. And even to some degree, it's useful at the point where they get skilled enough that you actively start letting go of them a little bit, because you know that when they fall with the skills that they have, they're probably not going to faceplant really bad, but they need to figure out how to walk. Well, God made us parents so we'd understand what he's doing with us. That's what he's doing with us. Shipwrecks are not accidents to God. By the way, in the context of that too, well, no, I'll just keep moving. Never mind. Romans 8:28. We know that for those who love God, all things work together for good for those who are called according to his purpose. Now, there's no guarantees here for people who are not followers of Jesus. Do you notice that in this verse? It doesn't say that we have a creator God who's going to make sure that everything's going to work out good for everybody. Anyone who actively rejects who God is and is offered to you for life and you reject that, I mean, all bets are off. Storms are storms. That's just all they are. But for those that love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to his purpose. And that purpose brings up another idea, that maybe your steps are established by him for a particular purpose in your life. Maybe letting go of the hand of that small child, but still being careful that they don't kill themselves when they walk. Like, you don't teach them how to walk by putting them at the top of a full flight of stairs and say, walk down the stairs, honey. That's a bad risk. You don't want to do that. But it is moderated risk and moderated learning and stuff like that. However, everything works together for good for those who are called according to his purpose. Could it actually be that everything that your steps are established in are somehow engineered to bring good to you? How is that possible? Now, if you're thinking about this for a second and you're chewing on it, if you're a thinking believer, you'll say, well, wait, I can think of a lot of super bad things that have happened in my life. And there's absolutely no way you can tell me that there's good in this. Well, now I get that because I have said the same thing to God. God, I see absolutely no way that there can be any good intended by you in this. However, you do say in Romans 8 that all things. So I trust you for this. And in the midst of it, although, God, you're not proving to me that this is going to be good for me. Because, if you're in the middle of the circumstance and say, well, God, I will put up with this if you show me on the outside of it how this is going to be good for me. That's what I'll do. But you know what? God never does that. He never says, I'll tell you where this is going to end up, just to encourage you to stay in it. Well, no. There's a faith issue right here, but Paul's already told us through the Holy Spirit that all things work together for good. Now, I got to admit, if you're like me, I have no clue how God does this. He is that creative. He's that creative. He's just that creative. However, if you don't love God, all bets are off. Let's move on. God's plan that he just referenced at the end there won't be thwarted. Yeah. And you know what? God's plan is couched in his love for you, right? So when you come to a circumstance or a shipwreck that you say, well, this is no loving thing for me to experience. How can this at all be a loving manifestation from God? There's just no way I can draw those lines together. Well, believe it or not, God's plan and his love for you will not be thwarted. Will not be thwarted. Many times what I say is that grace is sovereign. Grace is his determination to give to you what you don't deserve. And it always wins. It's sovereign. It rules like a king in the universe. God's grace toward you is sovereign. It's like a super king. So when God says, I'm going to commit to your good, nothing's going to stop that. However, in the midst of shipwrecks, we say, except for now, this is stopping God's grace to me, don't you think? No, it's not. Which one of us has as big a picture as God has about what's going on? None of us does. I mean, we know that. So that's a good first step. And that's what we cry out to God every time, and there's nothing wrong with this. It's a very natural cry. God, I have no clue how you can use this for good. However, I know your word. I know your loving kindness to me never stops. And I know that nothing can separate me from the love of God in Christ Jesus. And so, do I choose to live under the perils of what I can see with my eyes? Or do I choose to live under the promises of God and his word to me? That's your choice in the midst of those situations. Which one do you live in? Do you live in him or do you live in the world?
Live in him.
Live in him, because if you live in the world, all you see is threat, death, and destruction. If you live in him, all things work together for good. Yeah, so you do actually have a choice of which way you want to go. God's plan's not thwarted. This is a great verse. Oh, man, this is a good one to write down. Proverbs 19:21, many are the plans in the mind of a man, but it's the purpose of the Lord that will stand. It's the purpose of the Lord that will stand. And so when you're in the midst of a storm and those gigantic waves are knocking your head against the rocks on the shore of your life, you say to yourself, the purpose of the Lord will stand. This will not stop that. I just love this. I mean, you can make all the plans you want to. Many, in fact, many plans. Even plans to avoid shipwrecks you can see coming. And many times you fail at that. However, the purposes of God, they will stand. Okay. God bought you the ticket on this shipwreck. I don't think I like the sound of that.
There's no way.
Because remember in the story, Paul started out on one ship, they got so far, and then they switched ships. God bought him a ticket on another ship. And God bought him a ticket on another ship that God knew was going to wreck. God bought you this ticket. So when you're in the middle of a shipwreck, I tell myself all this time, well, God bought me this ticket. So here we go. Here we go. And God's purposes for me will not be thwarted. So here we go. God bought you this ticket. I say this a lot to myself. I'll give you an example. Okay, so your response is to don't jump ship. He bought you the ticket on this ship. So don't jump ship. Gosh, what's wrong with you? Okay, look, Hebrews 12:2. Looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross. Now I ask you, can you imagine a greater shipwreck than the crucifixion of Jesus? I mean, from a man's perspective, great shipwreck. And I'm sure at the time that Jesus was crucified, everyone who his closest followers and the people in town, I mean, and we're talking hundreds of people who were with him for several years. They looked at the crucifixion of Jesus and the dead man on the cross and said, this is the worst thing that could have ever happened. This is the shipwreck of all shipwrecks. And I'm convinced he's the Messiah and he's been killed. I use this all the time with me too. Is my shipwreck today as big a shipwreck as the crucifixion? And yet, was there purpose in that shipwreck? The best purpose in the universe. The best purpose in the universe. So, if that shipwreck of all shipwrecks, the crucifixion, could result in such good to mankind, is it possible that the shipwreck that God bought me the ticket to could bring good? Now, you got to qualify that a little bit, because the good may not be necessarily primarily to you. It could be to someone else who watches you as you go through the shipwreck. But there's lots of good involved in all of this. So don't jump ship. When I say dump ship, I want you to remember this word right here, endured. And that word endured, we've talked about many times in the past. If you are kind of a nerd like me and you like taking apart foreign language words like Greek, and I don't really know that much Greek, it's just fascinating to me. But this one is hupomeno. And hupomeno, meno means to stand, to stay, don't run away. Meno means to stay. So when your dog is getting ready to run away and you want him to stay, you go, stay. That's meno in Greek. Stay, meno, stay. Stay right there. The distractions don't draw you away. Stay. And you know what hupo means? Under. So, in the midst of that kind of shipwreck, instead of jumping ship, you need to stay under. I hate that. Stay under. Stay under. So every time in the New Testament, almost every time when you see endure or patience or forbearance, it always means that whatever it is that's bugging you, you need to stay under it. Because God bought you a ticket to this and there's some good coming out of it. Yeah, right. Stay under. Hupomeno. Because for Jesus on the cross, what he's saying in Hebrews is, for the joy that was set before him, endured the biggest train wreck in the history of the world. Well, that's different. That's Jesus on the cross. I'm just a regular person suffering the things I suffer through. I don't think that's a good comparison, Jim. No, I want to get out from under this. I can figure out a way to get out from under this. I'm not going to stay under this. I got lots of ways to get out from under this. However, you got to go back to that passage we just read that says the plans of man are many, But the purposes of God, remember, they're going to happen. So just stay under it. He bought you the ticket. Also, 1 Corinthians 13, what we read at weddings about love, but we miss this part. 1 Corinthians 13:7, love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, stays under all things. Oh no, are you kidding me? Yeah. Wait. I don't like that part. Let's scratch that fourth line. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, and does all things. Love actually decides. Love is always you committing to the best of another person. Love, as you commit to the other person, makes a commitment to endure everything. I'm not really sure I like that message. Especially when we're talking about conflict in the home, I can bear all things, kind of. I can believe, but stay under everything? Yeah. And I mean, just in terms of practical marital counseling, there will be conflicts that lead precipitously to shipwrecks in the house. That's the way we are as fallen creatures. And yet, there is a great wisdom in staying under those conflicts and letting God forge new hearts in us. And staying under it until he finishes. Now, we don't have time to really dwell on that too much more, but there's some great wisdom right here. And the motivation that drives you to endure is love, is the best for the other person. I would maintain that was what left Jesus on the cross and left him staying there, and he decided not to jump ship on the cross. Why? Because he loved us. Because he loved us. That's it. Well, he loved billions of people. That's a different kind of thing. Well, no, if it was just you, if everyone else is perfect, like me, like we're all perfect except one person in the room here, he would still do that out of love. Love's that motivation. And that's what Paul's getting to right there in 1 Corinthians. So don't jump ship. Also, another thing, while you're on board the ship, you need to proclaim some hope. So many times we're in a shipwreck with other people. And the idea is, I want to minimize my pain and suffering in the shipwreck right here. So I think I'm going to jump ship, and I'm out of here. Bye! This is way too painful for me. And as you move away, you leave all those people back on the deck, especially those people who don't know God. Say, bye, I'm out of here. And there they are in grief and torn and just suffering. With Paul, he was on the boat with these other people. And graciously, God gave him a little foresight of what was going to happen. And instead of Paul just kind of taking that information and holding it to himself, well, I guess we're all going to be okay. So we'll just get through this. He stands up on the deck and says, okay, listen, good news, bad news, we're all going to live, but the boat's going to be shipwrecked. He brought hope to them in the midst of that. Well, there's hope you can bring in the midst of these things. But if you jump ship on the ship that God bought you the ticket to, you're short-circuiting God's ability to speak hope into people's lives when they most desperately need to hear it. So it's not an accident when God books you a passage on a boat that's headed for a shipwreck with other people that don't know him. The expectation on his part is that you will speak hope to people who have no hope. The contrast in people's lives when they're in a shipwreck and you're talking about hope, they say, how can you have any hope? You see the contrast? The message of the gospel as being good news goes into high contrast. We're in the midst of people who have very evident hopelessness because of circumstances. That's why I like talking with people about the gospel who are in the midst of lifelong shipwrecks because they're hopeless. And one of the best places is in jails. Yeah, Pam? Yeah? These people are lifetime shipwrecks. Lifetime hopeless. And when there's a glimmer of hope as you stand on the deck of their lives and say, but there is hope. There's a possibility of peace and joy from God. They go, yeah, I don't know how that can be. Can I tell you? I'm here to tell you. I've had the best conversations in jail. Not when I was in jail, but when I was visiting jail. Well, that could happen if I was put in jail, I suppose. But because what people in jail have the great edge over everyone else that just lives in suburban America is they understand they need something they don't have. And they're pretty convinced because of a lifetime of failure that they never will be able to create it on their own. hopeless. So God bought you this ticket. Take the opportunity to proclaim hope on board the ship. Here's a bunch of these kind of opportunities. Psalm 57. This is when David was running away from Saul. Before David was king and Saul the king was trying to kill him so he wouldn't take over the throne. Psalm 57:1, David writes a song. Be merciful to me, O God. Be merciful to me, for in you my soul takes refuge. Yes! That's a great line. In the shadow of your wings I will take refuge till the storms of destruction pass by. Did he run away? No, he took refuge in God. Until the storms passed away, not until he ran away. It's a way different kind of idea. He hupomenoed right there. He stayed under. That's what he was. And then he uses these great two metaphors. I love these metaphors. My soul takes refuge, not my circumstances in my physical body, but my soul takes refuge in you. I'm in you. And again, that's the maritime idea of taking refuge in a port. And then he uses an animal idea. In the shadow of your wings, I take refuge. So you think about a little nest with little birdies looking for food, and the mama's there, and just protecting the nest. Yeah, under the shadow of your wings. Right. So that's what we're talking about right here. Great care is what it is. So he just decides to put his soul in refuge with God and to hunker down in the nest and not run away and wait for the storm to pass. Yeah. It's fascinating. It's instructive in Psalm 57 that when David writes this song, and this was a song to be sung, which was sung quite a bit. When he writes this song, if I was writing a song about the fact that the king of Israel is out with his army trying to kill me and I'm running on my own, solitary, trying not to be killed by this tyrant crazy guy who's the father of my best friend, all these conflicted emotions and stuff going on, the first thing I'd write in the song is, God, they're trying to kill me. This is not right. Didn't you send Samuel to my father's house and he took out a little flask of oil and he anointed my head and said, you're going to be the king of Israel? God, this is just not right. This is unjust. That's how I start my song. But he starts with refuge. So the tip is, when you're in the middle of a shipwreck, first thing to do, sing a song of refuge to yourself. And, if you don't know how to do that, remember Psalm 57. Read the rest of the psalm. You know how I remember to go back to this? Heinz 57. And then I want a steak, and then I can't remember why I'm in suffering. Yeah, okay. Psalm 57. Sing a song of refuge to yourself. Yeah. How about another one? Isaiah 25. Oh, man. If you haven't read the chapter 25 of Isaiah, this is before the best part of the chapter. So read after this, if you will. But Isaiah 25:4, you have been, past tense, a stronghold to the poor, a stronghold to the needy in his distress, a shelter from the storm, a shade from the heat. Past tense, past tense, past tense. You have been, you have been, you have been. And by the way, too, this is a list of people that classically don't have anyone who is advocating for them. These are people who are left out of society altogether. The poor, the needy. You have been a stronghold. Now that stronghold is the technical word for that rock. That's the stronghold. Strongholds were always defensible fortresses on the top of natural rock. If you've seen Masada in Israel, this big, upcropping, this kind of a mesa, that's a stronghold. So stronghold in the Old Testament, you have been that gigantic rock refuge for me, for those who are poor and for those who are needy. They can go there and you meet their needs. You're a shelter in the storm if I'm out on the sea, and if I'm in the heat of the incredible desert of life that the sun itself is killing me, in the middle of nowhere that all I can see is sand, there's a shade. Yeah. So anyway, what a great. Read the rest of Psalm 25. I'm telling you right now, it'll change your life. Did I say? Yeah, Isaiah 25. Thank you. Isaiah 25. Okay, another one. Isaiah 54. This is God speaking now to us. For the mountains may depart and the hills be removed, but my steadfast love shall not depart from you. For my covenant of peace shall not be removed, says the Lord. who has compassion on you. Is that not just the best word ever? Okay, let's read it again then. For the mountains may depart. So we're talking about earthquake scenes here. So bad that the mountains are, it's horrible. It's really bad. The mountains may depart, the hills may be removed, but God says, my steadfast love shall not depart from you, and my covenant of peace, his promise to you of peace. In the world you shall have tribulation, but be of good cheer, I've overcome the world. Okay, my covenant of peace shall not be removed, says the Lord, who has compassion on you. Who has compassion on you. You know, I think in the midst of shipwrecks, Satan has a wonderful opportunity to turn you away from God. And he uses the same argument, which is remarkably effective every time. And that argument is, if God loved you, why is he doing this to you? It's very evident from your circumstances that the compassion of God has come to an end. He no longer loves you, or he would have protected you from this. And you know what? Like idiots, we believe it every time. You're right. Why would God let this happen to me? Does he love me anymore? So you go back to what Paul says. Can anything separate you from the love of God? I mean, come on, really? Really? The mountains may depart, the hills may be removed, which, by the way, is under God's control to prevent. He's saying if you're in an earthquake zone shipwreck-wise, just remember, my steadfast love. This is your favorite word, VJ. Chesed. 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 Yeah. There we go. Okay. Yeah. My steadfast love. By the way, it's a love that's not just lovey-dovey love with little circles of hearts streaming around the top of your head. That kind of love. It's the best English translation for me is devotion. It's a loyal contract of love, saying I've decided that I will love you and I just never will stop. Signed, God. Steadfast love. Well, steadfast against what? Steadfast. Well, steadfast about all the junk in life. Steadfast against your failings. His love is still steadfast. God, I did something really bad today. How can you love me anymore? Well, because my love for you is steadfast. Remember that little note I wrote? I will always love you. Signed, God. Yeah, but did you see what I did today? Yeah. What a bad choice, Jim. And and there's going to be consequences to that. Sin's horrible. I don't know why you're dabbling with this stuff. But I haven't stopped loving you. My compassions never cease. In fact, they not only don't cease, but my creative ideas about bringing mercy and love to you are new every single day. Tomorrow, God says, you'll wake up, and I have a whole new plan to show you the mercies that I've got in store for you. His mercies are new every morning. Why? Because his faithfulness is great to us. Lamentations 3. Okay, I think this is my last one. God will be glorified, guaranteed. Guaranteed. Do you think that God would put you through such calamity and shipwreck that in the end, everyone around you will say bad things about God because God just wrecked his own reputation of love toward you? Do you think God would allow that? Well, sometimes it looks like that from the outside. And in fact, in the Old Testament, some of the Old Testament leaders, Moses, something in particular, would go to God and say, God, now look, if you let this happen, think what people will say about you. Think what they'll say about your promise to the nation of Israel. They'll say, oh, they trust in this God, and look, he turned his back on them, and he betrayed them, and look what he allowed them to go through. Well, God's got that all figured out. God's PR from heaven is all figured out. Don't worry about that kind of stuff. But the deal is that in every circumstance, God will be glorified. So let me ask you this. You're a thinker. How about Job? How about Job? Was God's glory somehow torpedoed in the Job story? Well, if you listen to his friends, you would say, oh yeah, they were convinced of it. They were convinced of it. Job, there is absolutely no way you're following a loving God or you're doing enough to be able to really be qualified for his love. Because after all, why would you be going through this? What did you do wrong? Look how God's being unglorified. So we can't glorify a good God in the midst of this bad stuff that's going into your life. That was the arguments they used. But in the end, was God glorified? Yeah. But he had to hunker down in the refuge to wait for the storm to pass. So, it's a fascinating thing. God will always be glorified regardless. And don't think that your circumstance is somehow going to change him being glorified. Because in the end of all things and all time, I think, this is Jim's theory, we will be telling one another about the remarkable grace of God in our unique circumstances. In fact, Ephesians 2:7 sort of hints at that. Go look it up sometime. It hints about the fact that through all eternity, because of what we've gone through here, and largely because of the shipwrecks that we survived together as we rested in God, because of that, then for all eternity, we can say, hey, that's nothing. Listen to what happened to me in 2012. In 2012, but God, whoa, that's great. Oh, that's nothing. I got another story. Back in 2020, see, do these things glorify God? They do. He's going to get glorified, guarantee. So while his compassion for you never ceases, and he's faithful to bring mercies to you that are new every day creatively, even larger than that, God is in the business of glorifying himself. And he does that by our reaction to taking refuge in him in the storms. Was God faithful? God was faithful. A couple of verses on this. Psalm 50. Call upon me in the day of trouble. I will deliver you, and you shall glorify me. Simple, simple, simple. Simple, simple. How simple? Well, at the shipwreck time, call upon me in the day of your trouble. Well, you're right in the midst of it. And part 2, I will deliver you. Part 3, you will glorify me. There you go. Pretty darn simple. It's always going to happen. God will be glorified, guaranteed. And then here, Mark 4, one of the best shipwrecks almost in the New Testament. The boys were in the boat. Remember this story, Mark 4:37? A great windstorm arose. The waves were breaking into the boat so that the boat was already filling. But he was in the stern, asleep on the cushion. And they woke him and said, hey, teacher, do you not care that we're perishing? Darn, what a stupid question. But, I mean, they get it. Don't you care we're perishing? And then Jesus does some stuff. You know the story? And what's their response? I love the apostles. And they were filled with great fear. This is once it got still, not while the storm was still going. They were filled with great fear, and they said to one another, man, who then is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him? I think we've underestimated this guy. So who is that? And you know what? When they realize that he's something more than he appears to be, then they're fearful. They are freaked out. If this guy can command the waves and the wind, we're dealing with dynamite in the boat. I mean, who is this guy? Well, now, when they tell this story years to come, and we don't have any accounts of them telling this story, they didn't tell it quite like this. They would say, you know what? We didn't know then who Jesus was. All we did was fear for our life. And he was so lackadaisical about it, he was sleeping in the back of the boat. And we had to wake him up and say, dude, we're dying. Don't you care? And then he woke up. He did some stuff. He rebuked us as well as the wind. And then we said to one another, who is this guy? Well, now that I'm here, years later, let me tell you who he is. This is the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords. This is the creator of the universe. Of course he can command the winds and the waves to cease. Did we know that then? No. But I can tell you more even today about what I've learned about who he is. So what are they doing when they say that? They're glorifying God. They're glorifying God. Would they have that opportunity had the ship not been in that position and had they not been fearful for their lives? Had they not been what they thought was inches away from dying? Would they have this great opportunity? I think this story was told over and over and over. It shows up in 3 of the 4 Gospels. I think they told us a lot. They said we had no clue who he was. But I got to tell you, if Jesus isn't who he says he is, he's some kind of madman. But let me tell you, he is who he says he was, because one day we were on the lake, and this is what happened. This is the creator of the universe. This is the Jesus I'm talking about. Not just a nice backwoods teacher somewhere in Israel. This is the creator, the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords. He's in control. Well, without the storm-tossed sea, the story wouldn't sound quite as good. But they had to come this close to thinking they were dying. And that's kind of what I want to challenge you with, because in our shipwrecks, we always think we're that close to dying. It causes us to weigh who's in the boat with us. That's what it causes us to do. And it challenges us to put our refuge in him and to draw near to him and to realize that when there was no storm here and everything looked fine, that was in a way sort of illusory. It was going to come and go. Shipwrecks come and go. We presume that in life, if things are good now, they'll be good tomorrow, and they'll be good the day after that and the day after that. And that's our presumption. So when the shipwreck comes, it surprises us. But we need to say, today, even when the sun is shining and there are no storms on the sea, I will find my refuge in him, because only in him do I find life in this wicked and perverse place. Oh, man. I'm going to show you some lyrics to a song. I'm going to try and play it. This could be a shipwreck itself. But Rich Mullins, songwriter, he died actually 25 years ago this year. 25 years ago this year. And there's several songs that have always impacted me very strongly. And this is one of them. Let me just show you the lyrics. There's bound to come some trouble to your life, but that ain't nothing to be afraid of. There's bound to come some trouble to your life, but that ain't no reason to fear. I know there's bound to come some trouble to your life, but reach out to Jesus. Hold on tight. He's been there before, and he knows what it's like. And you'll find he's there. So let me try and play this for you. Try is the word. So don't watch me, watch the words. There's bound to come some trouble to your life. That ain't nothing to be afraid of. I know there's bound to come some trouble in your life. That ain't no reason to fear. I know there's bound to come some trouble to your life. Reach out to Jesus. Hold on tight. He's been there before, and he knows what it's like. You'll find he's there. Let me sing the other verses. There's bound to come some trouble and some tears in your eyes. It's nothing to be ashamed of. I know there's bound to come some tears up in your eyes. That ain't no reason to fear. I know there's bound to come some tears up in your eyes. Reach out to Jesus. Hold on tight. He's been there before, and he knows what it's like. You'll find he's there. Now people say maybe things will get better. People say maybe it won't be long. And people say maybe you'll wake up tomorrow and it'll all be gone. Well, I only know that maybe is just not enough when you need someone to hold on. There's one thing I know that's clear. There's bound to come some trouble to your life. That ain't nothing to be afraid of. Just know there's bound to come some tears up in your eyes. That ain't no reason to fear. I know there's bound to come some trouble to your life. Reach out to Jesus. Hold on tight. He's been there before, and he knows what it's like. You'll find he's there. So, Father, as we experience our shipwrecks in life, forgive us when we think you're not in the boat. We pray that you would show us how you can be a refuge in the toughest parts of life. And that, Lord, we want for you to be glorified in all we do and all we say and all these experiences. But God, we come right back to the moment. Many of us are in shipwrecks, and there's great pain, and there's great fear. And Lord, we don't exactly know how to make you our refuge. Teach us how to make you our refuge. Teach us to see you as Fairhaven, the wonderful port in the storm. Teach us to see you as that rock, that stronghold that's lifted up, that's impervious to the smacking of the waves down below it. And Lord, cause us to understand more deeply that you have compassion for us that will never fail. They will never fail. And that your purposes of love toward us will never be thwarted. And then, Lord, give us the courage and the faith, most especially, to stay under. You are so good to us. And as we survive these serial shipwrecks in life, you change us, you draw us nearer to you. And Lord, we collect stories of the wonderful, gracious, merciful actions of God in this life. And we can tell one another through all eternity about the great God who saw me and drew me to himself, who comforted me under the shadow of his wings and allowed the storms to pass by in deep intimacy with him. Thank you for your great loving kindness toward us and your mercies to us that are creatively new every day. We love you. Amen.
If you'd like to stand and join us in this last song, we're just going to sing it once through. Oh God, you are my God, and I will ever praise you. Oh God, you are my God, and I will ever praise you. I will seek you in the morning, and I will learn to walk in your ways. Step you're dismissed. Happy Father's Day, y'all. Have a good week.